So I haven't made a video in a while, and you're probably thinking that maybe I took a few weeks to really work hard and make a great one. Nope, I'm just lazy. Also, I've been playing Guild Wars 2 a lot. Guild Wars 2 is a game I'm so neutral about, I have neither a great desire to play it nor a huge reason not to. People ask me all the time why I play ArcheAge instead of Guild Wars 2, and I usually say something like, Guild Wars 2 is boring. So why am I playing it again? Well, mostly because it kills time. In normal human life, you shouldn't even have time for one MMO, but unfortunately I'm not a normal human. But if I was, I'd ask myself, what should I play? ArcheAge or Guild Wars 2? Whoever said you can't compare apples and oranges didn't really know what they were talking about. Or more likely, it's just something people spout when they're too afraid of offending someone to take a stance. But yes, Guild Wars 2 and ArcheAge are very different games. On one hand is Guild Wars 2, a game made by hipsters who tried everything they could to be different from every other MMO, and consequently failed to capitalize on what makes MMOs great. On the other hand, you have ArcheAge, which is a Korean MMO, with all the problems of a Korean MMO. I've already talked about ArcheAge a lot and why I like it, but just in case you didn't watch those other videos, let me give you a quick overview. ArcheAge gives you more freedom than any MMO out there that I know about, while still maintaining a good level of polish. It's the best example of a sandbox MMO I can find. The world is seamless, and you can sail across entire oceans to reach other continents. Structures you build take up actual space in the game, and the economy, literally from the ground up, is run by players. Not counting the excessive amount of freedom, ArcheAge is very much a typical MMO in the way that combat movement and the way questing and item interactions work. If you've played World of Warcraft or anything like it, you pretty much know what you're getting into. It has its problems too, but I'll get into that later. And where a lot of MMOs copy World of Warcraft almost to the point where you can't tell them apart, Guild Wars 2 wanted to be different. The way that questing works is different. The way that leveling and world exploration works is different. The way that you acquire new skills is different. Even the way guild names are shown is different. Everything is different. And that's the underlying problem with Guild Wars 2. Both approaches are wrong. You can't copy another game exactly because then you copy its flaws. But you can't be completely different either because then you fail to copy its strong points. And don't get confused, I'm not saying that ArcheAge copies WoW exactly. I'm just saying that some failure MMOs have. Now it's actually really hard to compare these two games, not because they're too different, but because there's about every strength they have could also be considered a weakness. Both have things they could do better than the other, and I'll talk about that later. For now, I want to go over the double-edged swords that each game has. I can sum up my main issue with Guild Wars 2 in one sentence. Everything in this game is homogenized and sterile. What I mean is that everything is designed to give you a very specific experience and nothing else. It's all very nice and polished, but at the same time, there isn't any meaningful world interaction. The game feels like a robot's interpretation of what an MMO should be. Let me give you an example of what I mean. In Guild Wars 2, often the only things in the world that you can pick up and interact with, have any size or weight to them, are small items like broken bottles or rocks. Usually you can throw them or use them as a weapon for a few swings, but ultimately it's just a meaningless gimmick. In the main world you can't place anything down, or kill NPCs, or change anything in any way. Let's compare that to ArcheAge, where you and a few friends can completely ruin someone's day. You can block off roads or routes and force people to either pay you or try to kill you to get by. You can set up warships outside a coastal town and pummel the residents with cannons. Yes, these are asshole things to do, but the freedom to do them still exists. There's no open world PvP or player killing in Guild Wars 2. You have to go to a world versus world instance to do that sort of thing, and even then it's very structured and sets up safe zones and rules. Everyone says that other players are so helpful and nice, but I guarantee you it's just because there's no option not to be. For example, there's no competition for resources because they respawn and exist only for you. There's no competition over tagging mobs because the idea of tagging doesn't even exist. If you hit a monster, you get full credit for the kill, even if someone else hit it first. You also never need to roll against other players for loot at any point. I promise you that if you had the ability to flag up and kill other players and you had to compete for nodes and tags, people would be slaughtering each other for them. The very same community that seems so nice would be murdering each other and holding event monsters hostage so that only people from their guild got credit. There's no scarcity of resources and so there is no conflict. Conflict is what makes a game fun and engaging. It gives it longevity and makes it something you can play for years. In a game like that, the players create the content just as much as the developers do. I understand that not everyone likes open world PvP or conflict in their games. I imagine it's the same sort of people who have 400 hours logged into Minecraft's creative mode. That's fine, that's their personal preference. I'm just going over why Guild Wars 2 will never engage me in the same way ArcheAge does. Now I'm a fan of PvP and I actually kinda like PvP in Guild Wars 2. It has one major problem though, and ultimately is the reason why I don't even bother with it anymore. Gear doesn't matter in organized PvP. Basically, Guild Wars 2 tries to balance its PvP by making everyone have the same gear. You can make a level 1 character jump into a PvP match and have the exact same stats as people who have been playing for years. So PvP in this game is basically a MOBA. That's fine for people who like MOBAs, but it's not the reason I PvP in an MMO. The main purpose of playing an MMO, in my experience, is getting better gear and crushing people who didn't stand a chance against you at that point. You can complain about it not being fair, but it's definitely fun. Now, you would think that PvP in Guild Wars 2 would be really balanced because gear is one less factor the devs have to worry about. but it's really not, or at least doesn't feel that way. Every class has one or two very specific builds that do well, and everything else will just have you hitting like a wiffle bat and thrown around like a ragdoll. Personally, I like the traditional MMO approach more, where I can make some stupid build that really fits my playstyle and have it work just because I outgear other people. I tried for a while in Guild Wars 2 to make my own ideal build, messing around with different stat combinations and trying to find something that suited me. I got my ass handed to me for a few days. Then I broke down and looked up at the top meta builds for Guardian. So much better than anything I was doing that there's basically no reason to even try to run anything else, rendering most abilities, specializations, and weapon types that don't fit into the meta completely pointless. To give you a taste of just how big the difference is, I'll show you what I'm talking about. If I try to go with a burst damage build or anything that does physical damage, most of my abilities do something like 2 to 3k damage. If I go with the meta burn build, I can make one of my abilities do over 10,000 damage. To put that in perspective, most people seem to go with some kind of berserker build and usually have around 15k health. Now I'm sure someone's going to write me a dissertation in the comments about how in ranked PvP, Purging Flame is the worst ability in the game and I'm an idiot for even thinking about using it. But here's the thing, any ability that lets you put down a ranged AoE attack that does enough damage to nearly instantly kill the entire enemy team is pretty overpowered and unranked. I get most of my kills just by putting down that one ability and running away, allowing damage over time to tick them down to death, in seconds. Let's compare this to ArcheAge. ArcheAge is more about your gear than your build. You can give a character any combination of classes that you want, and make it work if you have the right gear for it. In fact, you pretty much build your class around what gear you have, instead of the other way around. This means that I play any way I want. I can make any build work if I have the gear. Yes, there are meta builds that tend to do better than others, but it's never quite as extreme. This kind of thinking isn't exclusive to ArcheAge either. In Vanilla WoW, you could pull off some uncommon builds in PvP if you manage to get the right combinations of gear or some gimmicky trinket. I haven't played WoW in like 4 years, so maybe it's not the case anymore, but it used to be, and it was fun. Guild Wars 2 doesn't allow you to do this. It makes you think you can make your own build and teases you with a few specializations that kind of sound like something that might work, but you quickly find out that any attempt to be creative is punished. Never will you find some neat or unique use effect on a weapon or piece of armor. Another example of how sterile this game is. See, by removing gear as a factor and giving everyone this homogenized and simplified set of stats to pick from, they've removed the only way that non-meta or creative builds can even function. They don't even give you every possible combination of stats that you might want. This game has been out for 3 years. There's no excuse for this. Another thing I look for when I PvP in games is simplicity of rotations. How many buttons do I have to press to get all my damage out? Ideally, you want as few as possible because usually getting a bunch of damage out quickly is what wins PvP. But at the same time, you want as many situational or anti-crowd control abilities as you can get, so you can be ready for anything. Guild Wars 2 says fuck you to all that and tells you exactly how many abilities you're going to get for each category. Now it's true you can select different weapons which focus on different things like mobility or support or just raw damage, but you have exactly one heal spell. You have like 2 weapon skills that you choose your weapon for, and then 3 others that you don't care about, but you have to take because that's part of your weapon. Your only real choice comes down to your 3 utility skills. 3 abilities that you have some amount of wiggle room with. But that's not even the real problem here. Counting your main bar, you have 10 abilities, plus the extra 5 you get from switching weapons. And then your class abilities, which vary on class, but I get 3. I think it's also fair to count rolling as an ability, since you have to press something to activate it and essentially has a cooldown. So that's 19 abilities. I have 19 abilities and will always have 19 abilities. Why is that a problem? Well, because it's another example of this game's homogenization. Let's look at ArcheAge, or pretty much any other MMO ever made. You usually have like 6 bars that you can fill up with abilities, but the game doesn't tell you how many you have to use. On my ArcheAge character, I think I have 12 abilities with my main build, and if I switch to an archer build, I can get it down to like 8. And I'm sure if I wanted to, I could make some build that had more. See this whole mess of UI with use effects, potions, food, and random shit I don't even remember putting on here? Well, it's my mess and I'm proud of it. My UI is like my personal space I've created in a way that makes sense to me. Guild Wars 2 doesn't have that. I don't feel like my character is my character, it just feels like a character. It feels like I'm playing a MOBA. Okay, I want to talk about value for a minute. ArcheAge is free but requires a monthly sub if you want to actually get anywhere. Guild Wars 2 has an initial purchase price, but no monthly fee. I like Guild Wars 2 a lot better as this model. I think most people do. The only problem is now they're making us pay for an expansion, and if they find that this makes a lot of money, then they'll be putting out another paid expansion as soon as they can. Honestly, I don't think the expansion is worth the money. From what I've been able to tell, you get a few new pointless areas, 1 raid, and a new class. I haven't decided if I want to buy the expansion yet, but I'm considering it because I hate myself. But I'd feel a lot better about it if it was about half the price it is now. Okay, so next comes everybody's favorite subject, pay to win. Here's the thing, these 2 games are easy to compare because they use nearly the exact same model. Basically, you have overpriced cash shop items, which are either RNG boxes, items that give you a chance to get better items somehow, or ease of life stuff. You can also exchange in-game money for cash shop credits, or cash shop credits you buy with real money for in-game gold. So basically it's the same for both games, and I don't want to read a bunch of comments about how it's bad when Trion does it because they're an evil money-grubbing company, but it's okay when ArenaNet does it because we like them and they put the players first. Trion has done some pretty sleazy shit, that's true, like bribing players to come back with free items that cost subscribed players hundreds of dollars. But let's not forget ArenaNet implying that you would need the base game to play the expansion, and then shortly before release announcing that you would get the base game free with the expansion, causing many people to have spent money on the base game preemptively when they didn't need to. They're both businesses, and their primary goal is to make money. The whole argument is an exercise in doublethink anyway, and if you don't know what that is, go read a book. I've been ridiculed and yelled at and basically been treated like a criminal for being okay with ArcheAge's business model, but here's the thing, I support capitalism, and anyone who disagrees with me is probably a communist. No, not really. But if someone puts out a product, it's their decision how much it should be, and it's the consumer's choice to buy it. Other than a founder's pack and a few months subscription, I've never actually spent any money on ArcheAge, and I honestly don't feel the need to. Funny enough, if I buy this expansion for Guild Wars 2, I'll have spent more money on it than ArcheAge, even though I've played ArcheAge more, and enjoy it more. Guild Wars 2 has a role-less system. Basically, there are no tanks, DPS, or healers. Every class is kind of its own self-sufficient mix of these three things. It's nice because you can make a dungeon group with 4 of your friends without worrying about the classes everyone is. And no one really seems to care much about your build or rotation or anything. It also trivializes everything. Everyone just runs around full berserker builds because there's no reason not to. PvE is basically everyone flailing around throwing out abilities. It doesn't matter if you die because of the rally system. Basically, similar to Borderlands, if you lose all your HP it's okay because someone will just pick you back up in a few seconds, or kill something, which also picks you back up for some reason. And because coordination between roles isn't even an option, dungeons have to be designed to accommodate any group setup. Basically, it means they're easy. Groups blow through dungeons in 10 minutes. And yeah, I know, the 10-man raid in the expansion is supposed to be hard or whatever, but people in the Guild Wars 2 forums have already been protesting that. I feel like it's only a matter of time before ArenaNet makes the raids just as easy as everything else. The only good thing is that there's a ton of PvE content to be had. You have a bunch of different dungeons, and then things like world bosses and events. But once again, even world bosses provide no challenge, and you basically have a 100% chance of success because of the massive amount of people who show up. But at least it's something to do. ArcheAge follows the traditional trinity of tank, DPS, healer. Sometimes you can't do a dungeon because you can't find the right group mix, but the good thing is you can easily switch your role. Dungeons in ArcheAge are more of a challenge than anything in Guild Wars 2, but honestly they aren't that hard either. Even the 10-man raid can be cleared in less than an hour with a good group, though the final boss can still be a challenge. Now the world bosses on the other hand can be a nightmare. Only the top guilds can do the tough ones. Personally I like this more. I like that some content is gear locked because it gives me something to strive for. Getting good gear and getting into a top guild is why I play MMOs. Having that as a goal is necessary to keep me interested. In short, the two games are opposite. Guild Wars 2 is about PvE. Yes, there's world versus world and Edge of the Mist, but honestly even Edge of the Mist is just PvE most of the time. ArcheAge favors PvP. Everything is PvP. Even trying to do a world boss will quickly turn into PvP when another guild tries to interrupt you. This leads me to by far the biggest sin with Guild Wars 2. If a game is titled Guild Wars, I expect it to have, Guild Wars. I'm tempted to call the game falsely advertised because its title isn't part of the game at all. There isn't even like a guild versus guild instance battleground or something. So Guild Wars 2 doesn't have a truly open world. All the zones are broken up into smaller instances. Usually that's a deal breaker for me. I pretty much require an open world to feel immersed. Every time I see an instance portal or I'm told to switch instances, it just reminds me I'm playing a game. Traveling in Guild Wars 2 is also really immersion breaking. There aren't any mounts and your character moves pretty damn slow. To make up for this, you're given these waypoints all over the map that you can teleport to when you're out of combat, at nearly no cost. Sometimes these waypoints are so close together I can literally see one while standing next to another. See, traveling around on a mount is fun and immersive, and it makes me feel like I'm part of the world. But Guild Wars 2 doesn't understand that because it was made by a hipster robot who doesn't feel emotion. The only thing that the world in Guild Wars 2 has going for it is constant events. Basically you can go anywhere and you'll see some other player attracted to the same spot by some event. So I've talked a lot about Guild Wars 2. It wouldn't really be fair to leave it without talking about ArcheAge. So other than the pay-to-win argument, ArcheAge has one major issue, and that's labor. I hate the idea of labor. It basically means I can only perform a certain amount of crafting or whatever a day before I have to shut the game off. I can burn my labor, do my dailies, and maybe run a dungeon or two. Puts a limit on how much I can enjoy the game. But labor is a double-edged sword. See, most people think that if there wasn't any labor in ArcheAge, everyone would be rich. But they've got it completely backward. If there wasn't a labor system in ArcheAge, everyone would be poor. It's because people would spend 16 hours a day on 27 different accounts mining or making armor or whatever. There would be too many resources on the market to make them have any value. ArcheAge does have a pretty solid economy though. It's the only MMO I've played where items were worth the amount of effort you put into making them, and it's because of the labor system. On the other hand, you have Guild Wars 2, where everything is worthless and everyone is poor. The hipster robot even made the auction house into a stripped-down, minimalist version of an auction house, where the individual postings aren't even separated. It's like you just put your items into a vending machine and it spits out money. Once again, all immersion, personality, and player interaction is removed. There is one other thing that bothers me about ArcheAge, but a lot of people seem to disagree with me on it. I think that there's too much of a difference between gear tiers in ArcheAge. No doubt it's to try to entice players to spend money on the game to try their luck at getting higher grade items. I've heard people say that if it wasn't far better, then no one would go through the trouble of getting it. Obviously they don't know gamers very well. At any rate, Guild Wars 2 does it better. Each tier of gear is only a little bit better than the previous tier, so you don't feel completely outclassed by someone who has one tier of gear higher than you. I'd be fine if Guild Wars 2 came out with a new tier of gear every few months or every expansion or whatever, but for some reason they've announced that they will never be releasing another tier of gear. That's a problem to me, because it means my character will get to the point where he can't possibly progress any further. And at that point, I'll have no interest in playing the game at all. In ArcheAge, there's basically an endless gear grind. New gear tiers come out faster than you can get them. This is done on purpose, to keep people playing, carrot on a stick approach. I like this more because it gives me goals. Guild Wars 2 doesn't give me any goals. So I like endless gear grinds, I just don't like when one gear tier makes a previous tier entirely pointless, I guess. That's what WoW likes to do every expansion, the main reason I don't play it. At least neither game is that bad. Anyway, it should be pretty obvious what my conclusion will be. In short, I hate everything. No, that's not my conclusion, but I want to push a point here. Before people get all huffy about things I'm saying now about ArcheAge and things I've said in the past, both still remain true. I enjoy ArcheAge, but I still have some issues with it. I also enjoy Guild Wars 2, but obviously have a lot of issues with it. A problem with gamers as a community is they often feel that you either need to hate something completely, or be a complete fanboy blind to any problems. Both extremes are wrong, and a pretty stupid way of looking at video games, or anything for that matter. Basically, what I want people to come away with from this video is that Guild Wars 2 is a more casual game completely devoid of fun, while ArcheAge is a more hardcore game dangling fun on a stick that you'll never reach. But we don't play MMOs to have fun, we play them to kill time. Cathartic, maybe, but certainly not fun. Gaming isn't about fun anymore anyway, it's about selling as many copies as possible. But I think that's a topic for another video. Maybe MMOs are just dead. Maybe I'm dead and don't know it, reliving the same shitty experience MMO after MMO. But maybe the MMO of my dreams is just around the corner. And when it arrives, I'll be here to talk about it.